to start by first of all thanking the Instruments of Peace for bringing this to all of us. I was very, very moved. I was asked actually to be the keynote speaker also in London for this same Peace Day, and I chose Ireland. One, because of all the love that's here and the need for healing, and also because from my background ancestry as well. I'm very moved because I realize most of us, we're working in all of our different jobs, and we're choosing to take an entire day out to really imbibe as much as we can about peace and be an instrument for peace in our world. And so I feel very privileged, and I know that all day long you've been receiving teachings and speeches and all having to do with how we can be instruments of peace in the world. And I never dreamt that my own process of healing would end up being something that would be used by governments and ministries and by people from all walks of life to bring themselves home to peace. And in my own life, my own direct experience is that all of us have peace within us, and I have no belief that if the world is going to heal and that we're going to find peace, that it's going to happen with our politicians. My belief is that if healing of our world is going to happen, if we're going to find peace, it's going to start from within each of ourselves, and that is where the peace can be found. And as Sean Kelly spoke about, he said sowing a seed. For me, it's like dropping a pebble into a pond, and the waves of that peace go out to our loved ones, to our families, to our communities, and from there. And for those of you who may know my story or may not know it, for myself, I found that forgiveness was a key and most paramount road to finding peace in my life. And when I was 39 years old, I was diagnosed with a basketball-sized tumor, and I decided to go a much more complementary route, not the medical route. And I was really catapulted onto a radical healing journey. And part of the gift of that journey is I found a way for all of us to come home to the peace within ourselves. And part of what the journey led me to was to find a way for all of us to get access to the cell memories, to release the stored pain that's inside us, the anger, the rage, the upset. And yet, in my own journey, when that happened, I went back to a cell memory of the violence and abuse that had happened in my childhood. And as a therapist in life, I thought that I'd had that handled. My thinking mind thought that I'd come to this place of acceptance of what had happened in my life. And yet that was what I uncovered when I underwent my own healing journey. And after I went through a process of releasing all that trauma, there came a point where I felt invited by my own heart, by my own soul, to forgive. And it was while I was forgiving that I realized that that tumor had never been clinging to me, that I'd been clinging to it. And I realized that 30 years of unacknowledged and denied anger and blame, that my whole story of blame for my violent childhood, that through forgiveness, that's when I finished with it, that my blame game was over. And it was only 3.5 weeks later that in Cedars-Sinai Hospital I was diagnosed to be textbook perfect clean. And so I really began to realize that part of healing for me and finding my way back home to peace was through the radical, unconditional act of forgiveness. And it's the foundation of all the work that we do. And as was said earlier, we now have a Journey Outreach, which is an organization, over 100 projects going on around the world that take place in communities where they could never even afford to get to a day like today, let alone pick up a book. And so we work with children who've been abused, a drug addiction. We work with people who've been disenfranchised, the Aboriginals in Australia, the Maoris in New Zealand. In South Africa, we've had over 100 projects in Kenya, Botswana, South Africa, Uganda, in Canadian North America. The members of the Aboriginal community there, the elders, have made this work, this forgiveness-based work, part of their spiritual tradition, and it's actually used by the government. And right now we're working with ministries for education around the world, ministries of justice departments. As a matter of fact, my husband's right now in Canada, working with the Justice Department for Canada. We're working with the Ministry of Justice Department in Australia, and with the Ministry of Education. I'll be going there to Israel in a few weeks' time. And what's really been a real teaching for me is that when you forgive, and when I'm talking about forgiveness, I'm not saying just forgiving other people. It's also forgiving life for the things that happened. How Sean Kelly so poignantly put it, for the fact that his computer went off and the internet went down. It's forgiving life from what life does. It's forgiving God, and mainly forgiving ourselves. And there's something that happens inside ourselves when we decide to forgive ourselves and to forgive one another. I once read in an enlightened master's book, after I healed from that tumor, that the root cause of all illness was lack of forgiveness. And I would also add to that that the catalyst for all true healing begins with forgiveness. That is when we let go of that old consciousness. And this was really brought home to me on an international level when I went to Israel. And as you know, that's a war-torn country. And we were working with someone at the front of the room. And when they were doing their journey process, they went back to a time that didn't belong to them. It wasn't their own cell memory. It was a genetic memory, a persecution consciousness that had been passed down in the Jewish generation since pretty much the beginning of time. And the cell memory that this woman uncovered was that of her parents who had been in the camps during the Holocaust. Now, in the journey process, you're always invited to release the stored pain, even if it's a genetic memory that's been passed on to you. And then there comes a point in the process where you're invited to forgive. And when she was asked if she would be willing to forgive, you know, there were a couple hundred Jews in that room, and she had Hitler there in her process. And she'd released so much devastation and rage and anger and just loss. And we wondered, would she be able to forgive? And there was like this collectively held breath. And she said, you know, though I can never, ever forgive the actions that happened during any war, they're not forgivable. She said, I can forgive the soul of that man. And she opened her heart, and with all her heart, she forgave. And when she forgave, as you can imagine, the whole room, their hearts broke wide open. And during their processes that afternoon, many decided to bring Hitler into their journey processes and really release the stored pain that had been passed on generationally, as there has been stored pain passed on here generationally in Ireland. And they also forgave. And the rabbi, when they decided to come over to Europe, I give an international program called the Journey Practitioner Program, and there were 18 different nations there. And 38 Jews from Israel decided to come to the eastern part of Germany, where we were holding this big seminar. And the rabbi said to one of the women, he said, "You go to Germany, our homeland, you heal, and then you come back to Israel and you teach us all how to forgive and how to heal." They came, and there were 280 people in the room that night. And I don't know if you know what I mean by it when I say the room felt charged. Do you know what I mean by that? I mean, you could really feel it. There were 87 German speakers on this side of the room. And it was like they were trying to reach out to the 38 Hebrew speakers that had headsets on, getting Hebrew translation on this side of the room. And it was like there was this big elephant in the room that nobody was speaking about, and nobody knew how to bridge the gap. Finally, on the second night of this retreat, I said, "You know what? We need to talk here." There's this big elephant in the room where there's, on one side of the room, all the German speakers wishing they could find a way to somehow reach out to the other side of the room, and there's the Israelis there who are desperately trying to find a way to bridge this gap. And I said, "You know what? World War II is not the only war that has ever happened. From the time that mankind first learned how to throw a rock or make a spear and throw a spear, we have all of us been waging war against one another. And no country is exempt. All of us have done that. No religion is exempt. Every single religion has waged war against every other religion." And I said, until we get to the root of this war consciousness, this conflict consciousness that's stored in all of our cells, that's stored at a DNA level, that's been passed on generationally, there will always be war happening on the outside, because the external always reflects the internal. The macrocosm always reflects the microcosm. And I said, if peace is going to happen on this planet, it's not going to happen because a bunch of politicians are going to get together. It's not financially viable. It's not going to happen. It's going to happen because we get real. And we go inside and we clear this war consciousness that's stored inside all of us. And I said, okay, well, maybe we weren't given guns when we were born, but all of us were issued invisible guns. And the bullets that we have are bullets of judgment, where we know how, and it's just with our family and friends. Usually it's the ones we love most. We know how to say the very thing that's going to make them feel this big. Or if someone tries to get too big, we know how to cut them down to size. We know how to close our hearts when someone else is trying somehow to get us to forgive. We know how to ignore someone and make them feel this small. We, all of us, have fired invisible bullets. But those bullets, the words that we've spoken, they've gone in and they've done their work. They haven't been merciful because the person's still here, but they live with that internal judgment. And that's the bullets that are going this way. And then there's the bullets going this way, which are even harder, which are the self-judgment. I'll never be good enough. I'll never measure up. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. And that internal self-judge, that's even worse and more strong than the external judge. And I said, as long as this is going on, this battle within ourselves, the external world will always reflect that. And so I welcomed everybody, for all of us to be nakedly, ruthlessly honest. And of course I joined in because I get a journey process once a week. I sure as heck am sure there's more than one issue stored in here, and I feel it's a privilege to do anything I can to clear out. I'll be doing this work to the day I die. I never want to believe that I've got it all handled. I'll always be a student of life. And so I joined in, and for 40 minutes we were emptying out all the ways, all the things I'd said, and I was standing up there at the front of the room, all the things I'd done that I was not proud of, things I said that I wish I'd never said, the things I hadn't done when I'd agreed to do it, all the invisible bullets that I'd fired knowingly and not knowingly, and I was astounded as I was emptying out how much there was there that I wasn't even conscious of. Obviously, I was in floods of tears. And then I asked everybody to look at all the ways that we judge ourselves. And man, it's like I had a voice inside my head that wouldn't show up, that was there to tell me any time I was trying to get too tall or get bigger than I'm supposed to be, or that I was just not smart enough, just didn't have the intelligence. I would never amount to anything. And the judgment went on, and I was emptying it out. And then came the point that we were all of us invited to forgive. And I honestly didn't know if I had it in me to ask for forgiveness from life, to ask for forgiveness from God, from the souls that I'd hurt both overtly and covertly and inadvertently. I didn't know how to forgive myself, but I realized I wasn't doing this just for me. That unless I was willing to take the lampshade off my own light, I wasn't giving permission to the world to do the same. And that the forgiveness wasn't happening in isolation. It was happening because I knew that if I could find a way to forgive myself, that would give others permission to do the same. And so I opened my heart, and it hurt, and it felt right. And I asked for forgiveness. I asked to be forgiven. I forgave. And I invited everyone to do the same. And when we were through forgiving, I asked everyone to open their eyes and just turn to the person next to you and just say, I forgive you for all the war consciousness that's been stored in your DNA for generations. And I asked for forgiveness. And we did this. We just turned to the person next to us and we forgave one another for a consciousness that got passed down in our DNA, in our cells. And then there came a point where I just said to everybody, you know what, just find anybody. Just find anybody. And at that very moment, the 87 Germans and German speakers, they leapt to their feet and they started running to the other side of the room where the Israelis were. And the 38 Israelis, they leapt to their feet and they started running to where the Germans were. And they met in the middle. And I watched as Japanese was forgiving American, and Polish forgiving German, Irish forgiving English. I watched as Christian forgiving Jew, Muslim forgiving Christian. And this just went on and on as all these 18 different, our own mini United Nations, with all the world's religions in one place, were walking around the rooms, falling into each other's arms, forgiving. And there came a moment, about 20 minutes in watching this, that it seemed as if all the boundaries of all the countries had fallen away, and all the religions had fallen away. And we were just in a sea of oneness, of unity, of wholeness. There were no more religions. There were no more countries, no more separation, no more boundaries. And as I looked in the room, I thought, you know what? Okay, we're just a tiny microcosm of 280 people. But if it's possible here with 18 different nations, it means that this is possible for our world. And so I realized that we were just that tiny pebble being dropped into the ocean of consciousness that is our world. And I realized that each one of us, and I admonished everyone in there at this seminar, go home, find a way to forgive. Forgiveness is your road to healing with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends, with your country, and with the world. And this is what my prayer is for all of us here, that whatever pride we may have, or righteousness or justification in whatever we feel we're justified in having done or said or believed, I have a deep prayer that everyone comes home to the peace inside them. And the forgiveness can be one of those routes home. And so my prayer and my belief is that there is a global imperative that we, all of us, be part of the change that our world needs right now. As a matter of fact, I actually believe you're here because you felt this calling to make a difference. And one of the ways that you can make a difference and bring peace to this world is through the radical act of forgiveness of yourself, of life, of one another, of God, of just the way things are. That will be our route, I believe, to healing. And Gandhi, probably one of the greatest peace activists of our known last 100 years, he said a quote that is often quoted, but I feel like it's very appropriate for this particular day. He said, "Be the change you wish for our world." Be the change. That was one man who, through a radical act of being, a teaching of nonviolence, liberated a country. And in each of us, we have this ability to liberate our lives. And my belief is, and it seems to be in all the world's traditions that I got a chance to be a part of, forgiveness has some sort of magic. It's what catalyzed the healing in my own body. It's what catalyzes physical healing, emotional healing, spiritual healing, and will bring you home to real peace in your lives. And so I pray that following this beautiful, very diverse day that has been a celebration of peace, that you might go home and contemplate. As David said, you go home and you kind of draw out bits and pieces, try to apply that in your life. And I pray that if you take nothing else, that you take this. That there was one woman she had brain tumors. And she healed using the journey work. And she was in her 70s. She still had a metal plate in her head, and she'd had those operated that were operable, and then those not operable, they were left there. There was nothing they could do for her. And she healed. A year later, when they did the brain scans, there were no more tumors. And I said, "Tell me, what is your secret?" She said, "Every morning, I get up in the morning and I praise life. I speak out loud all that I'm so grateful for. The love I have in my life, to listen to a child's laugh." She said, to listen to music, to walk down the street, to see the different colors, to smell the different scents. She said, "I speak out all that I'm most grateful for." And she said, "At night, before I go to bed, I think all the things that I need to forgive myself for, and I speak them out loud. And I think of all the people that need to be forgiven, and I forgive them." And she said, "I then ask for forgiveness for all of us, from God, from life." And she said, "I go to bed in an embrace of gratitude." And so I feel that her secret can be a secret that we all take home with us, that we take time to celebrate and be grateful for whatever life brings us. And not only thankful for that, but to find a way back to our hearts, back home to the peace inside, through forgiveness. So I thank you with all my heart for being allowed to be with such fellow lovers of truth and of peace, and I'm awed that you would want to spend a day just to celebrate this topic, and thank you with all my heart.